I was told to just eat more fiber, and I did that and it didn't work. And so what that really means is that you can end up in this really vicious cycle where you can be stressed, stressed from work or stressed from symptoms, stressed from whatever, and that can actually amplify the sensations that you're feeling in your gut. It's so funny because I think as a dietitian, I always thought that, like, I think in school there's some level of, like, sometimes you feel like the food police, and, like, really truly I feel like I do the exact opposite every day where I'm like, no, please eat food.
So you would agree if I said that with this lack of connectivity, holistic care isn't being provided. It's very difficult to provide that holistic care versus if there was that interconnectivity between all these multiple medicine disciplines, that we would be able to serve IBS patients even better.
I think so.
Hey friends, before we dive in, I just wanted to say thank you for tuning in. It means more than you know. When I started this podcast, I wasn't sure if anyone would care about gut health the way I did. But every message, every listen, every share, it's been so encouraging. This year, I'd love to grow this podcast into something even bigger. Something that helps thousands of people who feel stuck, frustrated, and unheard when it comes to their digestion. If this show has helped you in any way, I'd be so grateful if you hit follow or subscribe. It only takes 2 seconds, but it really helps get these conversations into the hands of people who need them most. Thank you, and let's hop into the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the BioBelly podcast, where we talk about gut health, healing, and how to take your life back from chronic digestive issues. Today's guest is someone I've been very excited to speak with, Kelly Taliaferro, also known as at IBS Dietitian Kelly on Instagram, which is how I met her. She's a Monash trained nutrition expert, registered dietitian, and the founder of Hughes Nutrition, where she helps people with IBS, MCAS, and colitis feel better without fear or restriction. What I love most about Kelly is that she gets it, right? Not just from the science side, but also she's lived with IBS for 10 plus years being misdiagnosed, trying everything to feel better. And now she's using that experience to help others heal faster, smarter, and with more love and compassion. In this episode, we talk about some of the most common mistakes people make when trying to manage IBS, especially around restrictive diets and fad diets. Whether you're someone who's tried everything and still doesn't feel better, or you're just starting your gut health journey, I think you're really going to resonate with this one. Let's get into it. Kelly, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Trishy. It's really nice. And that was such a nice introduction. Thanks.
100%. So, Kelly, I want to really start with your story because it is a super interesting one. What led you into the world of gut health and IBS? I know I talked about a bit of it before, but just for more context, if you could share.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my journey into gut health really started when I was a college student. I started having a lot of issues, a lot of symptoms, primarily something that would have been categorized as IBS-D. Finally went to the doctor and he diagnosed me with IBS, but I was missing some of the key symptoms actually, as I'll talk a little bit about later. And so I had this, IBS-D diagnosis. I was told to just eat more fiber, and I did that and it didn't work. And after that, I honestly just kind of assumed there wasn't a lot that could be done, and I just kind of lived with it. And that's definitely not what people should do now. But at the time, it was a lot. And I, had this thing where my symptoms started getting worse probably 3 or 4 years ago, and went back to the doctor again and found out after doing a colonoscopy that I actually have microscopic colitis, which is a form of IBD or inflammatory bowel disease. So that was a really big shift for me, and it got me really passionate about gut health and really helping people find solutions and answers faster than what I got. So that's kind of how I got to this point.
Wow, wow. And don't mind me, I'm taking notes, right? Because I'm trying to make sure I'm absorbing everything. But specifically for this microscopic colitis. So first it was manifesting as IBSD, and then it slowly, and then after testing you were able to figure out it's microscopic colitis. So is that usually the first step you take with clients, like having, like, just ruling out any extreme gut health issues?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So that's something that's definitely top of mind for me when I start working with my clients. I ask a lot of questions to better understand their symptoms,
Gotcha.
and that helps me get a sense of maybe what additional testing we might need and then what approach I maybe want to take with them. I Microscopic colitis is definitely something that I consider and I look for, but it's not the only thing. So, with microscopic colitis, like as a quick aside, I know we're talking about IBS today.
Of
The
course.
main one of the big differences with that is that it is more like the abdominal pain and bloating is not necessarily part of it's not a required part of that diagnosis. So like
Mm,
I think had the provider recognized that I wasn't having the same level of bloating and like pain, and it was more so like the IB like the I don't know, the frequency symptoms, let's say,
mm.
I think they maybe would have asked more questions and maybe I could have gotten that diagnosis sooner. Or had I gone back, I think had I gone back to the doctor, honestly, after things didn't work, I think that would have been another key thing. So the thing that's so tricky is that like with having IBS, like a colonoscopy is not necessary to diagnose it, but it is necessary to diagnose microscopic colitis. So there's kind of this thing where it's like, okay, it can be missed in like there are people that get misdiagnosed with IBS as microscopic colitis because they don't have that colonoscopy, but not everybody needs it, if that makes sense.
Got you. Got you. And if we could backtrack just a little bit, during that time where you did start having those symptoms of IBSD and just, that irregular frequency of bowel movements, can you maybe recall any specific lifestyle changes or something that might have caused that? Like maybe like thinking about the root cause of the start of that problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. So sometimes the root cause with those kind of digestive changes is kind of apparent, and then sometimes it's not so obvious. I get plenty of clients who just feel like they don't remember living any other way. Like this has just always been a thing. For me in particular, actually, the thing that seemed to bring it on was actually a virus. So
Oh,
like if you have, a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a foodborne illness, right? Something like that can definitely bring on IBS symptoms. But then other times there's like the causes just again can be different. Sometimes trauma can bring on those responses. And sometimes there's not really like a clear trigger that kind of started it, kicked it all off.
gotcha. And so when and that's so weird, right? Because I know there is like something called this brain gut connection, and because of that, it's like we're opening up into like a whole new world of root causes. It could be trauma, stress, even like just moving to a different country. Specifically for this virus, though, like because as I was mentioning before this podcast, one of my close friends, it was actually after COVID that he started getting these gut health issues. If we can maybe zoom into the science behind that a little bit, what is it like that a virus is doing that's kind of dysregulating normal gut function?
Yeah, so I think that's something we're honestly still understanding.
Got you.
I think that the COVID virus actually has done a lot for us
Yeah.
in starting to identify. I think number one, like raising that awareness to people that like viruses can be really nasty and they can do things like this.
Yeah.
So I think prior the virus that actually like changed things for me with my like microscopic colitis was actually the Epstein-Barr virus, which is a virus that we know it's also known as the monovirus, and it's something that
Hmm.
there's some research out there that shows that it can be like a cancer causing virus, and people don't know that. And I
Yeah.
think um, there's some very, very limited research that shows some associations with like microscopic colitis. We don't fully know why microscopic colitis happens either, though. But I know that I had the virus, and then a few months later started having symptoms. So that's one of those things where we're still just learning a lot. I see plenty of people that have start having issues like this after COVID, though that's not a unique experience, unfortunately.
Got you. So when you mentioned foodborne illness, so it was probably because of something you ate that kind of like started that virus?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with the monovirus, it's kind of there's no way to know. You can
Yeah,
get it after
probably.
eating or drinking after someone else, right? But with food, when I was talking about foodborne illness in particular, like foodborne illness really disrupts your gut microbiome. And the treatments, like antibiotics can as well. And so if you end up taking those, obviously. Sometimes we do see people that end up with, IBS symptoms after having a like some kind of foodborne illness after something they ate.
Mhm. Got you. And we mentioned a couple of the symptoms already for IBS. We mentioned like a lack of like a dysregular frequency of bowel movements, bloating. But for someone newly diagnosed or confused by all these symptoms, could you explain what IBS really is?
Yeah, absolutely. So IBS stands for irritable bowel syndrome, and it's a really common condition, unfortunately, that affects the digestive system. And so, from like the medical perspective, it's what we call a functional gut disorder. And basically, what that means is that the gut looks normal on tests, but for whatever reason, it just isn't working quite the way it's supposed to. It's a super frustrating condition because there's not really a test to diagnose it. And then there's no one single way to manage symptoms. And there's also no cure yet. So that's a super frustrating experience for patients. In terms of the symptoms, typically that's really how IBS gets diagnosed. Once we rule out certain other conditions like celiac disease or IBD, the symptoms that really have to be present for an IBS diagnosis are the abdominal pain, and then bloating and or distension, either one, or both, and then some form of either constipation, diarrhea, or both. So those are like kind of the three main things. Some of the other common symptoms are like gas and nausea. And the other thing to know is that IBS is also not a disease that involves inflammation. I like to point that out because I
Okay.
think there's some myth around what causes IBS, kind of like I mentioned earlier. So like what we're seeing from research is that it's like a mix of different things, including that like those altered nerve signals between our gut and our brain, changes in gut motility, gut bacteria imbalance, and then also carbohydrate intolerance can play a big factor too. So that's kind of what we see right now.
Got you. Carbohydrate intolerance. That does remind me of something called FODMAPs, right? The low
Uh-huh.
FODMAP diet. Is that usually a great first step towards healing that IBS? Usually, when someone's trying to figure out what's causing it.
It can be a really useful tool, but I don't actually think it always needs to be a first step.
Got you.
I think it's a tool that I think is really misunderstood and misused. And I'm happy to talk more about that if you've got more questions there. I can share a little bit more about what I think about it.
Got you, got you. Like earlier, you were mentioning how you kind of have like this, I guess, like an introductory exploratory call with the client and trying to ask them questions and kind of understand what could be the most probable root causes. If we can zoom into that, like into that call where you're trying to figure out what are the specific issues, what is maybe the thinking framework you're using to see what might be the root cause specifically for that patient.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I'm trying to maybe identify what's going on with a patient, what a root cause is, so that I can help guide them towards treatments that are going to be more likely to work, and then testing that they need to talk to their providers about.
Mhm.
Um, Typically, what I'm really focusing on are their symptoms. So I'm trying to understand what really is going on with those symptoms. So, like, are there patterns to them? Are there things that seem to make it better or worse? Are the symptoms that they're telling me about in line with the diagnosis they received? I always believe a patient, like when they tell me that they have a condition, right? I believe that they were diagnosed with it, that they saw their doctor, that they went through all the steps. But I also want to make sure that like we're headed down the right path for treatment purposes, because otherwise we're just delaying, how long it takes for them to get relief and results. So that's a really key thing for me. Some of the other stuff I really like to find out is, have they seen a GI at all? Did they have testing done? Or did they have a provider, which unfortunately happens, where they just say, yeah, I think it's IBS, and they get that diagnosis like that? Do they have other medical history that I think might be significant when we're talking about if it could be something other than IBS? And then there's some other things I like to talk about food wise. So, like relationship with food, foods they like. I want to understand how they make their food decisions. So, like, who do they live with? What's their support structure? Like, who's cooking? Who's buying the food?
Mhm.
Culture is a really big factor for me too. I want to make sure that
Right.
we're looking at foods that are culturally relevant for them, that they enjoy eating. And then budget is a really important thing for me when I'm working with people too.
Got it, got it. And so like the second step from that call, of course, like food is something you're trying to figure out like culturally relevant, so making sure it's either low FODMAP or excluding a few foods that were mentioned in the call that are causing the flare up. Along with that, what is the other phases looking like of that recovery process?
So typically what I do once I understand a little bit more about those symptoms and have a better idea of what what testing may need to be done and what treatments are going to work best, then I'll customize a plan for them. And typically that looks like picking a couple of things that we want to start working on and doing a little bit of education
Mhm.
around that specific topic, and making sure that we're kind of headed in that right direction. So we'll start with these one or two things, and then typically what'll happen is I usually will check in with them the next week or sometimes 2 weeks out, and we'll see how it went, see if they saw improvement, and then make adjustments from there. So typically, if it doesn't work, we'll pivot and we'll try maybe the closest second thing that I think might help, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And so it probably does take like a week or two in your experience to start manifesting to start experiencing positive improvements in the symptoms.
I would say usually, yeah, sometimes
Gotcha.
longer than that even.
Right.
For IBS, if we're doing something with FODMAPs where we're either reducing them or doing some form of elimination, then it can take, I would say, 2 to 4 to really get that improvement to see if it's going to work. If we think that there's something else going on, like maybe a histamine issue, sometimes the things we'll test actually will take just a few days, and we can tell if there's an issue or not,
Ooh,
and
yeah.
then make decisions based on that.
Yeah, that's actually something you did mention a lot on Instagram, this idea of mast cells and histamine. If you could speak a little bit about that and what that entails.
Yeah, so when we're looking at histamine and mast cells, there's still this is another place where there's a lot of research
Right.
still coming out, and COVID had a lot to do with that. So it's really come out more over the last 5 years. But basically, what we're seeing is that with histamine intolerance, that there are some people that either don't seem to process histamine very well, or like as a result of maybe not having a particular enzyme, or
Ah,
they have a lot of activation for whatever reason, whether, it's that those mast cells are they're reacting to stimuli that they don't need to, or that maybe they're taking in a lot of histamine and they, for whatever reason, it's remaining high. Um, the way that I work with people around that is very different than what you would do for IBS, but sometimes the symptoms can look kind of similar. Normally, to try to figure that out, I'll ask about other symptoms they're having. So, like, are they having rashes? Are they having itching? Fainting? Are they having issues with usually with those kinds of conditions, you're going to see other systems involved beyond just GI. So that's kind of how you can start to figure that out.
got you, got you. And that is like the whole other bucket of okay, so if it's not specifically of course it is IBS, but if it's not, it's probably histamine intolerance or a food sensitivity or a food allergy, right?
There's a lot of things it can
Oh
be, like,
yeah.
the unfortunate thing with these symptoms, right, with the bloating, constipation, diarrhea, is that, like, there's a lot of different conditions that have those that same symptom set, right? So, like, it could be something like histamine intolerance, could definitely be IBS. Sometimes you see types of IBD, like microscopic colitis, show up with those same similar symptoms. Also conditions like systemic nickel allergy syndrome, even conditions that are more about the how can I say this? A structural condition. So
Hmm.
even people who have issues with like pelvic floor dysfunction sometimes
Right.
can show up like that. And it's asking those questions to really differentiate what we think's going on so that we can get to the best management plan.
Got it. That's crystal clear. So yeah, I totally understand how that process works with a client, especially asking those questions, seeing what cues and signals you're picking up on, if it's a histamine, if if there's hives or allergies, or if it's specifically most likely just IBS, like I may be an IBSD or IBSC. But from here, what are like supplements or whether it's fiber or specific botanicals? Are you considering any supplements like that on that healing journey?
Yeah. So with supplements, I do like supplements.
Mhm.
I think that we want to use them wisely, I think
Right.
is the word I'm looking for. I think that when we think about supplements, some of my favorite ones are fiber. I think soluble fiber is really, really helpful for a lot of people with diarrhea and constipation. I think that digestive enzymes can also be a really useful tool in managing IBS, but you do have to really be mindful about what supplements you're choosing because again, like there's not a lot of regulation in the industry, unfortunately. And with digestive enzymes, not all of them work. I would say, period. Not all of them work.
Right.
but some of them also work very well. So understanding which ones work really well and understanding what they're designed to do and how to use those properly, I would say is really key. Otherwise, you're really, potentially taking something that isn't going to do anything for you, which is a waste of money, which none of us want these days. Uh, some of the other ones I really like are, you know, DAO. I'll use sometimes with people who have histamine intolerance, and then
Mhm.
there's like some other things too, like quercetin. Outside of like a very specific set of enzymes, or enzymes and supplements, I would say outside of that, the supplements I recommend are usually like the results of an issue. So like if I have someone who I know is not getting enough protein based on like the diet recall we've done or a record that they've kept, then we might talk about protein powders or other ways to get in more protein in food. Or say they have like a B12 deficiency or a vitamin D deficiency, then we'll definitely talk about supplements. But it's not something that I typically recommend just off the bat. And
Right.
a lot of times, if I have clients come in with a bunch of supplements, I'll typically work with them to try to whittle those down a bit to
Right.
make sure that they're not taking stuff they don't really need.
Yeah, because I remember when you were sharing your story, you were saying how like you took way too much fiber. Like you were the people just told like your providers just told you have more and more fiber, and that wasn't really moving the needle in terms of improving your symptoms.
Yeah, definitely. I think that fiber for me has been a useful tool once I understood how to use it
Right.
further on. But like in that moment, I went out and bought the first fiber supplement I found, and it did not help. It was the wrong kind of fiber for me, and also I wasn't doing the other things that needed to happen with the condition to actually treat the root cause. So it wasn't working for me.
I would imagine during this customization segment of your journey with this client with a IBS sufferer, you are looking at okay, these are the root causes. As you mentioned, dysbiosis, motility issue. So is it based on like first, if you could maybe give us a deep dive on what are all these different root causes that you feel like are most commonly occurring? And then from there we can ask like from there what's your thinking framework of what to prescribe, whether it's a low FODMAP diet, specifically how that whole recovery process is looking.
Yeah. So when I'm looking for like what I think may be contributing to the symptoms, again, like typically I'll ask to understand those symptoms first. And so like some of those common like root causes that I see are things like motility changes. I have some clients who just like their gut is just moving in different ways. So there are some tools we can use to try to help with that. Sometimes it's trying to think what are the most common ones, honestly. I think that is one. I think that sometimes when you got someone who, developed IBS from like a foodborne illness, there's like a specific set of things we can do in that space.
Mhm.
Sometimes I have people who have pieces of their gut removed, and so like that's a different kind of root cause we can work around in that way. Sometimes there's contributing factors like, I think having other conditions, so things like bile acid malabsorption or
Right.
even SIBO co-occurring with IBS, like we're kind of looking at those things too, if that makes sense. And the way that I work with those people typically is I have this, I would say like a toolbox, right? And I look at all of the tools in the toolbox that we can use to adjust how the gut is functioning in a diet perspective.
Mhm.
And then I typically will pick out the ones that I think would be most effective, try those, and then kind of see what happens. And if those things are not as effective, then there may be something else at play, right? Like this again is a condition that's not caused by just a single thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes it means also need to look at stress or sleep or movement or sometimes medication supplements, things like that. So although some of those things start to fall outside of my scope, I can make sure that my clients get recommendations for services like we can all kind of work together in that respect.
Got you. And in terms of those services, I have heard a little bit about gut-directed hypnotherapy and
Yeah.
CBT. I actually spoke to a specialist a few weeks back, and she was telling me how like even like the relationship with food, sometimes there's like a fear, and so before someone even brings the fork to their mouth, their body's already starting to manifest those issues. If you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that kind of gets back to the gut brain connection, I
Yeah.
think a little bit. So with that, stress and anxiety has such a huge impact on the gut because of this connection, right? So we really have like two different nervous systems. We have our gut nervous system and our brain, right? And they are connected by this two-way system that, like I kind of mentioned, was the gut brain axis. And when we're stressed, our brain sends signals to our gut and it changes how it works. So the brain can, in response to stress, slow down the gut or speed up digestion. And then it also can change how pain signals are sent and also interpreted. So, like, it can send signals that end up getting amplified beyond what they should typically be. And then as it's receiving signals, it can kind of, for just lack of a better word, kind of blow them out of proportion, right? So the signal it's receiving gets amplified, and so it just feels a lot more painful than it really should. And so what that really means is that you can end up in this really vicious cycle where you can be stressed, stressed from work or stressed from symptoms, stressed from whatever,
Mhm.
and that can actually amplify the sensations that you're feeling in your gut, which then can cause more stress and anxiety. So it can just be a really difficult, vicious cycle to break.
Got you, got you. And going backtracking to the diet tools in the toolbox, I know you mentioned a little bit about like a food tracker, like a food journal. I was wondering technically what that looks like. Is it like a person would be kind of like tasked with like writing down every food they eat and then like maybe in like a week coming back to you and saying, okay, this food did this meal probably gave me bloating in this way, and then you're able to kind of figure out what type of food it is, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You
Okay.
definitely don't have to write down
Right.
everything you eat. It tracking, I think, can be a useful tool to collect data, but if
Mhm.
I do it with a client, I typically don't do it for more than a day or two, and
Okay.
usually that's for me to get like a like a more realistic like calorie or protein count, something like that.
Got you.
Um, but one of the things we can do is if we're gonna try to figure out what triggers are, there are trackers that you can use that are more symptom based. There are people who I can do it where they don't have to write anything down and they can just kind of remember. There's also this envelope method that I've used with some clients where they write down the trigger, put it in an envelope, or what they think may be the trigger, put it in an envelope, and then open it up after a period of time, usually at least a week, 2 weeks, sometimes a month, and then look for things that are occurring more than once. That can be a really like healthy way not to like hyperfixate on
Right.
the things that you might think are an issue. The thing that I pick really depends on the client. I think when I have clients who have disordered eating patterns, I typically don't ask them to track everything. That's not usually my first approach. And a lot of times I also won't do full elimination diets with them either because again, it's just not appropriate. There's other options we have that aren't going to add to that food fear.
It is super unique that you were kind of mentioning how when I was asking about the food journal, you were saying that I also sometimes have to think about their protein and their macros. That's something that I like. It's interesting because IBS dietitians usually like the one main priority for them is, okay, relieve the IBS symptoms. But then of course, first principles, a dietitian, of course, you're trying to step one is ensure they have a well balanced diet and a good relationship with food. How often is it that simply like just with that preliminary step of prescribing them certain foods given their culture, that you feel like, okay, now that Sally has a very well balanced diet, that's actually fixing all her IBS symptoms. How often is that?
I think I don't know that a balanced diet usually fixes it,
Hmm.
but like the number of times that I think I'm first step is to get people to eat more or eat more diversely it's very frequent.
Mm.
Honestly, a lot of times I do get people that have come in really restricted or they're just avoiding a lot of food out of fear or they're just not eating often enough, they're skipping meals. It's so funny because I think as a dietitian, I always thought that like I think in school there's some level of like sometimes you feel like the food police and like really truly I feel like I do the exact opposite every day where I'm like,
That's
"No,
awesome.
please eat the food." Like I need you to eat cuz like if you're not eating enough, that's going to create a whole like host of other issues. So, I think it's it's not that eating a diverse diet will like, I don't know, cure it, right? It doesn't cure things, but it is really substantially helpful in making sure that you we don't develop other issues. So it is definitely really, really important.
Got you. Got you. It's interesting because I'm doing some research myself, just immersing myself into gut health. And one thing I learned, especially to your point of not eating enough, a big problem of that. I was looking at GERD, so gastroesophageal reflux disease, and they were saying that, dude, it's not just if you eat too much, it's also if you eat too less, because that stomach acid buildup can start putting pressure on that lower one thing is all these words are such tongue twisters, but
Sure they
like
are.
lower esophageal sphincter. Apparently it presses up on that, and it causes a whole bunch of issues, as you said.
Yeah, I think with IBS, a really good like comparison to that is skipping meals. So like one of the things people sometimes will do is they'll skip meals, they'll eat once a day. I have at least a couple of clients that came in just eating it at night. And like the problem is by that time, a lot of times you're starving, right? There's like so many issues actually, but like what'll happen is you're really hungry. So you end up overeating, and overeating actually can trigger for some people. One of the things that happens when you eat is that your stomach stretches, and it's this thing called the gastrocolic reflex. It's a very normal thing, but when it stretches like that, sometimes it's really sensitive for people with IBS, and that can send people running to the bathroom really quickly. And so, sometimes for some people, that can actually trigger a flare, skipping meals. Also, my patients who have IBS C and skip meals, like they're missing an opportunity to actually leverage that gastrocolic reflex earlier in the day. So that's one of those things that, like, yeah, not eating enough absolutely causes a lot of problems.
Got you. And I love you mentioned IBS-C specifically. One thing I'm learning more about, just speaking to some naturopathic doctors, is more common than not, but more often than not. Some people, like people with IBS-C, will start manifesting symptoms of IBS-D and then IBS-C, and then it like becomes mixed. Like with that curveball, how is one to figure out like how to navigate a client, IBS sufferer, to full recovery?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So there is like an IBS-M category, right, where you're having both. But there's also something that is like it's commonly referred to a couple of different ways. I usually call it overflow diarrhea, where basically you can get so constipated that like the stool just goes around, and that can show up as diarrhea. And so sometimes that's actually the thing we're working with. So like the approach that I take with people is like let's make sure that the bloating, let's try to identify where that bloating is coming from, whether it's for just from being constipated, because that alone can cause issues, right? Or is there like a carbohydrate intolerance along with this? And then trying to level out um that cycle. Basically, what we're trying to do is regulate it a little bit better so that like if we can remove the constipation, usually the diarrhea goes with it for
Hmm.
some people. So that's something that I try to do, and that's a lot of that is fiber and water, but then also meal timing, and like there's other things too.
Yeah, meal timing. I know a little bit about it, especially when I was looking at GERD. If you could speak a little bit to that, like what are maybe best practices for our meals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think number one, um, don't skip meals. Like I mentioned,
Yeah.
like that makes things worse. Eating food on a regular basis helps keep your gut moving regularly. So like skipping meals just isn't helping anybody. Meal timing, the way that we time meals really depends on whether it's IBS, CD, or someone who's dealing with IBSM or maybe overflow
Hmm.
diarrhea. But there's different ways to do that depending on what they're dealing with. But at the minimum, like we want to make sure we're eating regular meals, that we're eating balanced meals, that we're getting like protein, carbs, and also fats in there. For some people, eating a really big breakfast is really helpful, and that's something that we work on. For other people, doing a smaller breakfast is better. I would also say coffee timing is another thing. A
Mm,
lot of people drink coffee, and like drinking that with or without food can have different effects for different people, and that can be something that I use as a tool with clients too.
got you. And like I was actually curious about your take, because from what I'm hearing, meal timing, it's a lot about having meals throughout the day, like obviously with a good amount of gap, to make sure you're satiated all throughout and that your gut is functioning well. But then what's your take on intermittent fasting, where people also talk about that as something that's good for your health?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think intermittent fasting is a scale, right? And I'll be really transparent. I'm not an expert on this, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna try to stop at the point that I'm not as familiar. But I do think there's a space where intermittent fasting, I think I know there's a lot of people that find it really helpful, but there's also plenty of people that it doesn't work for them. I think whether you do that or not really depends on person to person. I think I've read some research that it seems to help with, like, it can help with like blood sugar management and things like that, which is so interesting because like there's other research that shows that like eating more frequent meals actually is better for blood sugar management. So I think on the whole, it's typically not something that I recommend for people with IBS. Like generally eating a little bit more frequent, at least 3 times a day is like what we're aiming for. Having said that, the intermittent fasting windows, I think the lowest one of them is like a 12-12 or like a 14-10. And like
Mm,
that's not that far off of a normal, or off of,
yeah.
I would not even say normal. I would say off of like an average eating schedule. So like I think it's the more extreme versions that I think can be kind of problematic for people who have gut health issues.
Got you. And previously, like in the previous question, you mentioned something really cool that sometimes if someone does have IBS-C or IBS-D, if they have a proper treatment, usually their constipation and diarrhea symptoms can go down. But one thing I see, Kelly, a lot is when people usually have constipation, they resort to something like laxatives. I was wondering, what's your take on laxatives? And if it is something that's beneficial when you have constipation.
Yeah, I think they can be a really useful tool when you're constipated. The level of frequency that people use it, I think it really depends on the person. There are laxatives there that are not habit forming, so like they are safe to take
Okay.
every day, or stool softeners. I think we have to be a little bit cautious though, right? We also don't want to overuse them. So laxatives and stool softeners are often something that I have for my patients who have constipation, that it's part of their treatment plan, in the sense of like it may not be something they take every day, but we get really clear on when to use those as like almost like a rescue kind of situation if we can't manage it without them. I do have some clients that have like physical changes in their body where they really do need them, and so in
Mm.
those cases, we also make those a part of the treatment plan. I definitely think I'm not afraid of them by any means, but we want to make sure that I try to make sure that when I'm using, or whether when we're talking about those, we've looked at everything else as a part of that too, and we're not just relying on them, if that makes sense.
Got you. So specifically, body change is like a cue or a signal you're looking at to see if laxatives is a good option in the solution.
Yeah, so I think in particular, there's multiple places where I think it can happen,
Hmm.
but I think if you have like again like a physiological change, so like the things I'm thinking about are I've had some clients who've had different kinds of gut surgeries that actually have resulted in things just moving really slow.
Uh,
And that is something that you can't really fix, right? You can't put it back once it's taken out in that respect. So like for some people like that, it's something that kind of just becomes a part of their life. I think I'm trying to think of the other one that I see sometimes like that. Um, it's not coming to mind.
all
That's
good.
the very first one that came to my brain though, is like I do have some clients with like a physiological reason for it.
Got you. And then on the flip side, diarrhea. I know a really popular one is Imodium. Is that habit forming or?
No,
Okay, good.
Imodium is safe to take
Cool.
every day. There's plenty for microscopic colitis. Actually, that's a really major treatment as
Oh,
well.
wow.
Like that people will just take. I think even above what's on the box, like your doctor can even prescribe more than what's on the box. It's a really safe medication to take. But ultimately, like I think trying some of these other things before just relying on it is a good choice. It could be a really great rescue med, but if you can manage it in a way that allows you to still enjoy things and not have to rely on it, then like why not do that? You know?
Absolutely. And you mentioned microscopic colitis, right? I know that sometimes when the gut issue is a bit more severe, antibiotics come into question, right? Like we mentioned SIBO. And one thing I'm learning a lot about is rifaximin and just
Mhm.
this like kind of this tightrope that medical providers and dietitians have to work with making sure we're not disrupting the gut microbiome. But at the same time, if it is so severe, then introducing antibiotics. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's another space where there's just not a lot. There's still so much research that has yet to be done. I think that it is a really delicate balance where the treatment for SIBO is antibiotics, right? And like rifaximin is the most popular common one, but it isn't always the right choice based on the type of bacteria that's overgrowing. So sometimes providers may have to try to do a different antibiotic just to see if a different one works. It is a really, really tricky space right now. There's still so much room for us to understand more about how it works. And, I help people with SIBO with management, like as they're being treated, but it's one of those things where like antibiotics really are a key feature of that condition.
Got you. I remember like when we were talking about histamine intolerance, right? You were saying Trishy, it's usually like if it's itching or fainting, then I'm like, okay, that's probably a route to take. For SIBO though, I feel like it's a kind of like a gray area. How is it that like you're kind of diagnosing if that's probably the main culprit?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important that I'll ask for if they haven't had, if I suspect based on the symptoms, is a SIBO breath test.
Ah, got you.
It's not perfect, but it definitely still has a lot of value and it can provide a diagnosis actually for SIBO. Um, some of the things I look for symptom wise with SIBO that are kind of different from IBS are bloating, like really bad bloating that doesn't really seem to get, it usually starts, generally speaking, for most people, it's best in the morning and then just keeps getting worse. Usually it doesn't get better if you go to the, like, have a bowel movement. And then the other thing that is a really key feature is really, really bad smelling gas, like rotten eggs, something where
Mm,
you're like, something is wrong. Like it should not smell this bad. That's another really key, like, hallmark feature. So if I have patients that give me some of those symptoms, then I might start to ask more questions about if they've had, a test done. And if not, then that's usually where I say, okay, hey, maybe let's like talk to your provider about this. Um, the best, the treatment with the most evidence out there right now for SIBO is still like a low FODMAP diet. There's some other variations that are there too, but that is one thing that like we can start to make some swaps even before like finding that out, because again, that treatment plan is similar, generally speaking. So the big difference is the antibiotics.
got you. Got you. And I we mentioned a lot of different supplements and ingredients that can cause improvements in symptoms like constipation, diarrhea, bloating. I just wanted to share a little bit, and I know you probably know some is a little bit on what I'm working on, but I am actually on a mission to kind of figure out if there is a way to create a supplement specifically for IBS where it's keeping in account the root causes. So not something like a laxative, right? Because I feel like laxatives, as you said, they're great tools, but I think you would agree, chances are low that a laxative is what's going to be like causing a recovery, a full recovery from IBS. I think more it's probably going to be looking at the root causes and figuring out, okay, is it a motility issue? Is it a dysbiosis? So specifically for like a supplement like that, if you could maybe give me any insights as to what like your dream product line would be for an IBS, what do you feel maybe I should look out for in a supplement specifically for IBS?
Yeah, so I think it's because we're still
It's
researching it. I think
tough.
that's such it's a tricky question. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that having more options for like some of these digestive enzymes that are a little bit more affordable, I think would be a key thing, or that
Yeah.
separate them out individually. Some of the key ones today are combined, and like not everybody needs all of those components, but some of them are like they can get expensive, right? So I think that's like one place. I think when it comes to probiotics, I think that there's like they can help. They're typically not like an all-encompassing solution, but having options for making it easier for people to access the probiotic strains that actually do have the best evidence,
Mhm.
along with like helping them understand how to use these tools. I think
Yeah.
that's maybe the biggest opportunity. Like there's a lot of the companies on the market right now are trying, but it's a hard concept to help people understand. So I think those are some of the things that like I maybe would be looking for, like supplement or digestive enzyme wise, like what I think would make it more useful for people.
Got you. Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, because I feel like that's what people really need. It's kind of like that education first approach. Just as you said, like with you with fiber, it was like with other people, it might be just I don't know how to use this probiotic. And I feel like because there is like a bit of like this information gap, we can be more easily swayed by like the marketing out there. Like if it has like a 50 billion TFU, we're like, wow, it's gonna this is a magic pill, so it's like specifically when you think about how to use it, what tactically are we thinking about? Like, what is something that's very important to inform the consumer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it depends on the supplement, right? But if
Right.
we're talking starting with digestive enzymes, I think the key thing is understanding which enzymes you need.
Yes.
I think if there were a way for customers, I do have clients come in sometimes who do have an understanding of certain foods that really seem to cause issues, and I can start to pinpoint what I think their carbohydrate issues are from there. So like having a way for clients to be able to try that for themselves, I think could be really helpful. I think when it comes to probiotics, making sure that that the brands that we're talking about are not, maybe not the brands, but the products
Hmm.
have it like enough that they're strong enough to be effective. I
Hmm.
think that's a key thing.
Right.
And then, there's a tool out there actually that helps dietitians choose probiotics based on symptoms. And so having something, because a lot of the research right now is kind of symptom specific. So something like that that allows patients to maybe do that for themselves, then and it's more like, all linked together, I think could be really helpful. Like if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, so for the digestive enzymes though, I found it very interesting. You were saying that sometimes what through questions or maybe a test, you're able to see which enzymes are deficient, and specifically like if this signal or cue arises, you're like, all right, it might be a carb, I guess amylase deficiency. So what is it? What does that question framework look like to figure out what type of enzyme deficiency it could be?
Yeah, so I think when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at to understand what happens if they've limited carbs in the past, like have symptoms gotten better. That's usually like one of the first steps. If they've never done it, then a lot of times we'll try to identify if there are certain foods that seem to make it worse. Um, Getting really specific though about what foods, like foods that seem to make it better or worse, I think is probably the best way to do that. So, like for example, um, there's certain foods, unfortunately, that I think are really commonly, like, I don't know, recommended
Hmm.
to avoid. So, like dairy, gluten,
Yeah.
2 really big ones, right? So, like, if they avoided, gluten, what happened, right? Or dairy, like, if dairy seemed to make it that like, if they avoided dairy and that helped, then they may have like, it may actually be at least partially lactose intolerance, right? But, like, if they still had symptoms, and there may be something else, either, enzyme-wise that is needed, or they may have something else entirely different going on, and so that's the other kind of key component is it's like, picking out these like, we can identify, like, the carbohydrate intolerance portion, but sometimes there's other things that go along with it. So, like, identifying when that happens, I guess. If that
Yeah, got you, got you. I know we're going a little over. I'm sorry.
it's okay. No, you're good.
But yeah, that gives me a lot of insights, Kelly, because I'm trying to figure it out, like, uh, because the gut health, especially the supplement space, it's so saturated, and there's so many
Mhm,
different options out there, and it's weird because sometimes the root causes, like, a supplement which is very good for a root cause, it might not get that much attention because
mhm.
like specifically even on the packaging, a person with not that much knowledge of biology or gut science, they don't know if digestive enzymes is what's going to heal my constipation or heal my diarrhea, so that's kind of the tightrope I'm playing with here, where I want to be education first, but I also want to resonate with people at first glance. So
Totally. Yeah, it's a tough space because it is saturated, and getting people to understand. I think breaking out from the noise of all of the different enzymes, there's so many digestive enzymes out there. And like I said, some of them just don't work, like, or they're not going to be helpful in this specific space. So helping people understand if that is a solution for them, I think, and then also, you know, which enzyme from there to take, and that's kind of like that's what dietitians do across multiple appointments. So trying to figure out how to do that without the contact, I think, is really the question, right? Like that's the challenge.
got you. And as a dietitian, Kelly, do you feel like there are like maybe there is like a gap or something that you feel like this process could be better streamlined and it'll help me better serve my fellow IBS sufferer? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think the single biggest opportunity, honestly, is the connectivity. So,
Yeah.
like, it's the connection between healthcare providers and the patient. And, like, I think that so often, I think GI providers there's just not the communication there all the time between like the GI providers and
Yeah.
dietitians and everybody else. And like, I think by not having that connectivity really causes a lot of problems. I think for GI providers, all too often I see them send someone out with like a low FODMAP diet handout and that's it. Or just say like, you have IBS, try eating more fiber. And it's like, when we do that, what really happens is that with a low FODMAP diet, you're not giving people the tools or the resources that they need to really be successful. Sometimes sending them out with that is really a bad idea because if they've got a history of an eating disorder, which like the GI provider is probably not asking questions to find that out, you're actually exacerbating a really serious health condition, right? So I think there's a
Mm.
space where because there's providers don't get a ton of time. I think that connectivity, it doesn't always happen. I do have plenty of providers that do send referrals, and I'm always grateful when they do that because it's like we're making sure that this person has the opportunity to really receive really good quality care that way. But I think any tool that helps like connect providers with other medicine disciplines, and I would say not just dietitians, but also pelvic floor physical therapists, like um gut directed hypnotherapists, like all
Right.
of those resources, when their time is limited. I think that's like one of the biggest gaps.
Got you, got you. Yeah. So you would agree if I said that with this lack of connectivity, holistic care isn't being provided. It's very difficult to provide that holistic care versus if there was that interconnectivity between all these multiple medicine disciplines, that we would be able to serve IBS patients even better.
I think
Yeah.
so. I think that if we had like better I think if patients got to the tools they needed, I think that's one big piece. I think there's other things too,
Right.
but I think that's a really fundamental opportunity
That's
for
the
us
needle
in our
mover.
healthcare system.
Got you. Got you. And it's in terms of success, right? Long-term success for a patient. Just to wrap it up, what does long-term success look like to you? Is it symptom freedom or something deeper?
I think that's such a good question, and it varies from person to person. I think that there's definitely a person who can have complete freedom from their symptoms where they understand. I honestly think that you can get to a point where you're not having symptoms every day, and that's a huge thing for most people. I think the idea of saying, I don't think success can be, well, I am never going to have a flare ever again. It just doesn't work like that. Like things happen, we have stress in our lives, things change, and like flares are going to happen, but I think real success is understanding how to manage it when it does happen, and then also knowing when to ask for help and when something changes beyond what your understanding is. So I feel like that's usually what I'm aiming for with my clients is making sure that they understand how to manage their symptoms independent of myself, and then also that they know when to come back if there is something that changes in their lives really dramatically.
Love it, love it. Well, if a person does have a gut issue or if they're coming back, what is a place they can reach out to? I know I mentioned your Instagram at IBS dietitian Kelly. But besides that, is there any other place, maybe a website where we can reach out to you or a form?
Yeah, so I appreciate you
Yeah.
asking that. My website is under it's Hughes Nutrition, so that's HUES nutrition.com. And there is a form there where you can like submit that. You can also book a discovery call there. I always want to make sure before I accept clients that I actually think I can help. So that is a place where people can connect with me too.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for all your time. Yeah, I'd love to, keep you posted on what we come out with, especially because I feel like from this conversation specifically, supplements, while that's great, what's going to serve people even more is just empowering the people who are trained to heal them, right? Trained to care for them. And that's like the IBS dietitians, the gastroenterologists, the gut hypnotherapists, and connecting them. So care is um, ultimately holistic.
Absolutely. I think that that's such a key thing. And I'm always looking for more tools for my toolbox to help people. Like the more that I know and the more resources I have, the more I can help my patients. So yeah, I'd absolutely love it if you kept me in the loop.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all your time, Kelly.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really nice to meet you and it was a really nice chat. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.